Hi, it's good to be back with you again today, speaking again on the theme of the wilderness. Last week we saw a passage in the New Testament, Jesus in the wilderness. And today we're going to look at a passage in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, and where we're going to find it looks like Moses in the wilderness, but really all of the people are in the wilderness, even while they're still in Egypt. And I'll explain a little bit of that as we go through. I found it interesting lately to note the number of books that I have come across or that other people have suggested to me or even given to me that address a growing situation, a growing awareness in our world today. I recently read a book titled The Common Rule: Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction. Another that I've just received is called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Another one that someone recently gave to me is titled Christ-Centered Mindfulness, Connecting to Self and to God, which is advertised as, quote, the perfect antidote to the frantic pace of our lives. Do you see a theme going on here? And these are some of just a few of the most recent titles amidst a growing stack of works addressing this common need in our world today. The need for focus and the restoration of calm and peace, or what the Bible calls shalom, in the midst of chaos and the frantic pace of life as we know it. And for those of us that need more than just a book, I don't know that you were aware of it, but there are now what are known as black hole resorts that promise relaxation through digital relief. And I don't know about you, but after so many Zoom meetings and things like that, I could use some digital relief these days. Well, these resorts bar the use of any digital devices on their premises. They require you to forfeit your laptop and your cell phone or any other technology when you enter the property. It may sound extreme, but these things are catching on. More and more people are taking part in them. These resorts don't offer satellite TV or on-demand movies, but instead they offer zero technology or screen time. And they promote days of solitude and peace and quiet and quality time spent with other people. Blaise Pascal once made the observation that distraction is the only thing that consoles us in our miseries. And yet it's the greatest of our miseries because it hinders us from reflecting on ourselves, and it makes us insensibly ruin ourselves. One of the constant themes in Scripture is this invitation to slow down, to take time, to reflect on ourselves and to reflect on God, to be with God. And one of the places where this often happens, we see throughout Scripture, is in the wilderness. It is, it seems, one of God's preferred places of meeting with us and transforming us. But you may ask the question, why does God lead us into the wilderness? What is it about the wilderness that is His preferred place of working and meeting with us? Well, often it is to do the very thing that we realize we need the most. God leads His people into the wilderness kind of like this black hole resort to remove all distractions where there are few, if any, provisions for physical, emotional, or spiritual needs. In the 4th and 5th centuries, there was a large number of men and women who fled the cities where life was easy, and they moved out into the wilderness so that they could intentionally deepen their relationship with God. These desert saints believed that the desert forces us to face our weaknesses squarely. It strips us of any pretensions or any illusions that we may have about ourselves, and it enables us to recognize our absolute need of God. We so often think of deserts as a barren wilderness, and I don't know about you, but I have spent enough seasons of my life in various deserts around the world. Coming from California, we had the Mojave Desert. For a short time, I pastored a church in Arizona in the middle of the Sonora Desert. When we lived in Asia, there was the vast Gobi Desert not far. My wife and I spent time in the Sahara. We've never been to the outback, into the desert parts of Australia, but we would love to see that sometime. And we think of these kinds of places as barren, uninhabitable, inhospitable kinds of places. But in Scripture, often the wilderness is a place of meeting. More often than not, the wilderness is a place not of barrenness. It's a place of encounter. This is where God often meets us and purifies us and heals us and leads us into a deeper experience with Him. It's the place where we become increasingly alive to God's presence. It's the place where we can hear His voice. This is often the place where God leads us when He wants to do that deep work of transformation in our souls. Last week we looked at the beginning of Jesus' ministry when the Spirit led Him into the wilderness for 40 days. And today we want to look at another wilderness scene found in the final verses of Exodus chapter 2. The context of these verses is in the wilderness of Sinai. This is where God encounters Moses while God's people are living in bondage in Egypt. Originally, Egypt had been a place of refuge. It was a place of blessing. It was a place of flourishing. But over time, a new king arises in Egypt, and he deals harshly with these people. Chapter 1, verse 13 tells us that they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. They made their lives bitter with hard service. You see, at what had been at one time a place of refuge, a place of blessing, was now a place of bondage. It had become a wilderness for them. They came originally for safety and security to a land of prosperity, to escape this famine. And it has now become their worst nightmare. Maybe you can relate to that. No, maybe not slavery, but you can look at a season of your life and you can wonder, how did this happen? How did I get here? What did I do to deserve this? I've been in ministry long enough to have experienced a few seasons like that. I remember a time when I faced undeserved accusations from people that I only wanted to help and to serve. And I remember one time in the midst of a season like that, I said to my wife, my only desire was to bless. Why am I experiencing such abuse from this person? A place of blessing had suddenly become a place of oppression. And it leads to such obvious questions. And they're the kinds of questions that we frequently ask when we are in the midst of a wilderness season ourselves. Does God know? Does God care? Has He abandoned me? Has He just left me here on my own? And that is no doubt the feeling of the children of Israel as they cry out to God. The end of chapter 2. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And notice this, God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. I want to focus our thoughts on those last couple of verses 24 and 25. God's response to the people's suffering. No doubt their cries and their groans went on for a very, very long time. I remember one of those seasons in my own life, 4 years of silence, 4 years of feeling alone and abandoned and wondering, where is God in the midst of all of this? There is a great blessing, I think, which I think we overlook, when we become deeply aware of our intense need for God. And these people are fully aware of that. They are aware that God and God alone is their only hope. That's what a wilderness experience will do for us. It brings us to the end of ourselves until our cries go up to God. But no doubt they wondered, does God care? Why has He abandoned us? Why has He left us in the midst of our suffering? But look how Moses describes God's response. God heard their groaning. He remembered His covenant. He saw the people of Israel. He heard, He remembered, He saw. And I love that final phrase, He knew. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever considered the idea that God contemplates you? Because that's what Moses is describing here as these people are in this horrible experience that has gone on for a very long time. He's describing God in His contemplation of these people. The all-knowing, all-loving, eternal, relational God of the universe takes time to consider you. He is intimately aware of your circumstances, whatever those circumstances are. He knows your challenges. He knows your sufferings. He knows your joys. He knows your sorrows. He knows your failures and your successes. God sees. God hears. God knows. And God understands all of it. And I am convinced that He feels it as well. David, in so many of his Psalms, reflects on this overwhelming thought. Consider Psalm 8. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him? Or what about Psalm 103? As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion on those who fear Him. for he knows our frame. Literally, he knows how we are made, and he remembers that we are dust. Or Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down, you know when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and you are acquainted with all of my ways. Verse 17 of that psalm, which I love, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. Moses says here in this passage, here in Exodus, that God remembers. He remembers us in those desert places. I remember one Christmas when we were living in China. The postman came to our house one Christmas morning, and he had a slip in his hand telling us that we had a package at the International Post Office, which was clear across on the other side of the city. So our son, Thomas, and I instantly ran downstairs and we got a cab, knowing that the post office would be open because it's not a holiday. It wasn't a holiday in China. And so we knew that the post office would be open. So we went across the city and we collected our very large box that somebody from the States had sent to us. And as we were driving back home with this box, our son Thomas made the observation, isn't it wonderful to be remembered? They didn't just not forget us, but they actually remembered us. You see, to remember is much more active than merely not forgetting. To remember takes initiative, and to remember, as we see with God here, leads to a response. It leads people to do something about it. It's one thing simply to not forget about something or someone, but remembering actually requires some action. It motivates God to do something. And so God responds to us in the fullness of everything He is, the fullness of everything about us. And He answers us according to the fullness of who He is, His character, His being, His attributes. Everything of His grace and His justice, His mercy and His wrath. Every bit of it is an expression of His love for each of us. And so God contemplates you in this desert place and can only see you through the filter of His love. To do anything less would deny Himself and compromise His character. And so God meets Moses in this very unusual way. He speaks to Moses in a burning bush. You see, not only does God hear and God see and God remember, God responds. And He speaks and He says to Moses, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I have come to deliver them. Again, I have seen, I have heard, I know their suffering, and I have come to deliver them. His hearing and his seeing and his remembering leads to the response of delivering his people. God's plan to rescue his people led to the Passover and through the wilderness. It would lead them into a longer wilderness season. And again, God reminds his people, I am with you. I will not forsake you. You are mine. This is the promise that God makes to each of us in our own desert seasons. The wilderness is not something to be feared or to be avoided. It is the place where God intentionally removes all those distractions that crowd out his voice. God invites us into this wilderness with him, where he wants to heal us, where he wants to transform us, where he ultimately gives these people a new identity, no longer slaves, but priests. I don't know where you are at this moment. Perhaps you are wondering, like the children of Israel, how did we get in this place? Perhaps it's a place of bondage and you desperately seek freedom from that bondage. Perhaps you are in the midst of a season of suffering and you long for relief. Maybe you're in a long season of questioning or wondering or confusion. When will this end? Or perhaps you are in a season of contentment and delight. The important thing to remember, as we see here, is that God is with us in it. Be still and rest in the truth that even in the silence of the desert, God contemplates you. He knows exactly where you are, and he knows exactly what you need. He hears, he sees, he remembers, and he knows.